Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, David Sulzer. Better known in music circles as Dave Sulzer, he is a renowned neuroscientist and composer. He is a faculty member at Columbia University with appointments in psychiatry, neurology, pharmacology, and the School of Arts. His neuroscience research centers on synaptic function in health and disease, spanning topics such as Parkinson's, Huntington's, schizophrenia, autism, and addiction, with his lab publishing over 200 studies that have been cited more than 40,000 times. He's also an award-winning composer whose work bridges science and the arts in remarkable ways. How are you doing today?
Oh, fine. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We were just briefly talking about books, and you were kind of sharing that you often don't finish the books or you don't read them fully. So I was curious about how you end up deciding which books to read and how much to read of them.
Um, so academic kinds of books like the ones here, this is I'm in my laboratory, but this is the office in our laboratory. Um, there'll be books like well, there's for instance, because it's big letters, you may be able to make it out. Like there's a book called Physical Chemistry, another one called Merritt's Neurology, another one called Single Channel Recordings. Nobody reads those front to back. You sort of elect what you're interested in, and you read specifically about that. For instance, the
Mm.
neurology textbook is going to have, I'm guessing, a couple of hundred entries on different sorts of neurological disorders. So you wouldn't do that. However, you were asking me how do I ever read full books? And I actually have read some full books recently that are on this table, and we can get them, that are science books. Oh, and here are a couple of others that I'm reading, sort of front to back. But this is still a collection. This is good for right now. So we're
Ah,
speaking, let's see, September 24th in the year 2025. So this is a time that Trump and Vance and Musk and people like that are really treading on concepts like free speech um, and freedom of movement and things like this, and criminalizing speech. So um, this is just a collection, including the most famous um, pamphlets by Thomas Paine and some of them by Jefferson. And so again, I don't read it cover to cover in one sitting, but it's quite appropriate to read what Tom Paine and Jefferson wrote, considering that how ugly the current situation is. This is last night, and by the time people see your podcast or listen to it, it may be forgotten, but it was big news because the comedian Jimmy Kimmel had been thrown off the air a week ago. Last night he was back on.
I
Did
just
you see
watched
that?
I just watched
Yeah,
the monologue. Yeah.
yeah. So there's sort of it's really a throwback, right? To some of
Yeah. I mean, so that book you're
stuff.
reading right now, was that written by Jefferson?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Paine and
This is
Jefferson.
Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson.
Oh,
I
that's
mean, it's
awesome.
just a collection, right? Of
Yeah.
Thomas Paine wrote, like probably his most famous book is Common Sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and reading some, and it's the arguments for the American Revolution. This is an important one right now. The Rights of Man. This happens to be part two.
Mm.
Another timely book that it's difficult to read cover to cover, but Aldous Huxley's wrote Brave New World.
Ah,
This
I
is
mean,
Brave New World Revisited. So this is
oh, he wrote another one.
yep. So Brave New World, I'm reading the back of the thing. That's from 1932. but this was written in the 50s or 60s.
Oh,
So
cool.
sort of, you know, he kind of predicted things that might happen under people like Stalin. Yeah, this is 1958. So it's interesting to for him to go back and what is it, 75 years later, or so what, no, whatever it is. Um, about 70 years later, for us to go back and read what he thought about his original book
Mm,
20 years later or so after he wrote it. So those are a couple of very timely books that I'm reading right now. And
nice.
then, since you're asking about reading, three books by Johannes Kepler. Are you familiar with Kepler?
Hmm.
Okay,
I know the name, not his work so much. I think. Wait, let me guess. Let me guess. I know it has to do with the planetary movements.
correct.
What he was the one. That might be where my guess might end. But wait, let me just guess, just because I've been wanting to work on my hypothesis of things. Hypothesizing. Okay, Kepler. I think.
Well, he was the one that so he carried on Copernicus's
Galileo.
idea that you know, ancient there were ancient Greeks that thought that the sun was the center of the world, meaning the
Yes.
planets. And then even Kepler and Galileo still thought that they even they didn't think that the stars went on forever. They thought the stars were embedded in the sphere and that this was rotating around where the planets and sun were. The argument at the time, you know, started a bit less than a century before Kepler and Galileo was well, it's the center of the world. And the world means everything. It means the stars, the moons, the planets, the sun. Are these is the center of the world the Earth, or is it the sun?
So not just the solar system, but of the universe, or
Mhm.
oh, interesting.
And that's one of the things that I get from reading these three volumes, which are Kepler's. Um,
Is there a center of the universe?
to us, no. To him, yes. And to Galileo, yes. So his
Oh,
first one, his first book, written when he was in his early 20s, is Secret of the Universe. And this turns out to be, from our standpoint, mostly wrong, but it's kind of beautiful to read.
hmm.
And then he, by working with the astronomer Tycho Brahe, he realized kind of that he was wrong and came up with the new astronomy.
Oh, cool. Oh, that's
And this
legendary,
is a
huh?
textbook
In
that
your
he
own
wrote.
lifetime, to realize that your work was wrong and then to redo it is such a nice time.
He's an interesting guy. And he and Galileo had a um, good relationship.
Did
And it's
they are they
interesting.
both I think Galileo's in Vienna or no?
No, Galileo is Italian.
Okay, and
He was living, I think, in Tuscany. And I mean, you know, the Leaning Tower of Pisa is in Pisa in Tuscany. And this is a textbook he wrote, the epitome of Copernican astronomy.
hmm.
And then the one that's been most interesting for me is called The Harmony of the Worlds. So Kepler wants to not just explain uh, the planets. He thinks that if he can explain the orbits of the planets, he can explain everything. He can
Hmm.
explain the elements. He can explain how the tiniest objects to the greatest largest objects are built. And not only you know, physics or matter objects, but even music. And so the harmony of the worlds, he tries to use the same rules that were used to describe the planetary motions to come up with the the rules of music, the laws of music.
Hmm.
And between his interest in art, what we now would call art, and music, all these things kind of came together for him to come up with his laws of planetary motion, which are correct according to us. You know, 400 years later, here we are, and there's the the calculations that he did about how, the sun is the center of the world. The stars, forget the stars. Galileo and Kepler were all, it took a while for people to realize that stars had different distances. But for them, to figure out the orbits of the planets, to figure out how far they are from each other, how far they are from the Earth, how far they are from the sun, how that's related to the size of the orbit and the time of the orbit. Of course, they could already figure out how long it takes for an
Hmm.
orbit. That was known since, for thousands of years, because before electric light, if you were a curious person, you try to figure out the stars, the orbits of the planets, which don't orbit like all the other stars do.
Hmm.
So that's he, we now describe them as Kepler's three laws. The third one, which relates distances to the velocity of the planets, that's in harmony of the world. So that's the third one discovered. But here in new astronomy, he figures out that the planets move not in perfect circles like Copernicus thought, but in ellipses. He also talks a bit about the moons of Saturn, or maybe it's the moons of Jupiter or moons of Saturn. But Galileo had found them. Galileo was using a telescope, and then Tycho Brahe, the great astronomer who preceded Galileo, didn't have a telescope. He just had really good eyesight. So he followed the orbits of the planets and the comets with the naked eye.
Wow.
Anyway, so you're asking, do I actually still read books? Yeah, I do. Some of them I
Yeah.
read straight through, and some of them I skip through. And these are, all books that have something to do with the natural world.
Yeah.
Um, but it's not like I only am interested in only the natural world, but there's a lot to be interested in there. And um, one of
Yeah.
the
I
things I
mean,
find really fascinating, and it's not just Hugo Town, it's like everybody, um, including me until 4 or 5 months ago. We have no idea how people before roughly 1700 thought of the universe. We're not taught this. We don't read about it. The fact that I told you that people thought that the stars were in a sphere, and you have these terms we still use like seventh heaven. Where'd that come from? Because there were a bunch of concentric spheres that define
mm,
orbits and planets and stars. That now we know we have, I don't know how many elements, on the periodic table, over 100. Back then there were four or five. Um, and none of them are our elements. So, and what were those composed of? Well, they were composed of small objects like cubes or
yeah, we've come a long way in our
uh,
understanding.
icosahedrons, okay? And these were analogous to the atoms of the time. Yeah, we have come a long way. But the idea that we have no idea, us contemporary people have no idea of how people thought of the universe for thousands of years until the last about 400 years. That's kind of amazing.
Mm.
And so that's become sort of a bit of an interest of mine, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think the history itself, I think mathematics for me became really fascinating once I began to learn about the history of things
Hmm.
and
Me
piecing
too.
together rather than just like, all right, this is what it is at the end, but piecing together each piece. Actually, there's been something that's been really interesting that's been kind of on my social media radar but it's these two guys who are they stream, but they ask these like random scientific questions, and then they come up with these like kind of ridiculous hypotheses. So like one of them,
Mhm.
for example, is like, what moves faster, sound or light? And then
Mhm.
they have like their like flashlight on their phone, and then they yell right next to it, and then they
Mhm.
just like they're like but and a lot of people are just making fun of them. But something that I was thinking about watching those videos is that I can tell you light is faster than speed. But to be
Mhm.
honest, I have no idea why that is. I read it in a book somewhere when I was in high school, and I just have that memorized. But
Mhm.
they could have said the opposite, and I would have also repeated that back to you. If they said in that book sound was faster than light, I would just say that. I don't actually know why. Where somebody at least having the intellectual humility to be like, I don't know, let me actually just play around, even though we're being silly, to test it with this, at
Mhm.
least to me is like, oh, there are so many things that I just take for granted because I read somewhere rather than actually knowing why. But when you start actually getting into the why, that's when the history comes up. That's when you start learning why somebody else thought a different way before. And you realize, oh, like having one of these beliefs doesn't mean you're dumb or wrong. It's just like a part of this kind of long tradition and lineage of knowledge that's been passed from generation to it's the most beautiful thing on the planet.
Yeah, well, our species is about the only one that can really kind of do this. I mean, there are other ones where culture is past, but to the extent that we do it is quite amazing. And also, looking at it that way, since we are the only species that can try to understand what happened thousands of years ago, um, by reading, um, it's also kind of amazing at what we forget and ignore. So,
Mm,
the
mm,
I my quote pop science book, which is called Music, Math, and Mind. There's a copy back there. I wrote it for mostly younger people who fall in love with music. I think that's permanent in the human, species. We're always going to have people that just kind of fall in love with music or other kinds of arts, whether you can make money at it or not. They're just become entranced with it. It becomes very important, and especially for younger people, uh, they want to know. They may have all these questions, very basic questions of the sort that you just said. Why is there a speed of sound? How does the speed of sound determine musical notes, for instance? And so that I wrote the book for that. So if you're actually interested in those kind of questions, I actually wrote that book
cool.
for people interested in the kind of questions you just outlined. And my next pop science book, as won't surprise you, is about the world of Kepler and Galileo and how people thought of the universe at that time, and then how it changed, and then the role of art and music in that, which were absolutely integral, especially for Kepler.
Mm,
And the next book I plan to write, I've kind of started it and then put it aside, is same for visual art. So for instance, we have dimensions. The painting is 2 dimensions, sculpture is 3 dimensions. What is a dimension? What does that mean?
mm,
Um, you're not taught that in art school. You're taught a little bit about the color wheel, but what is color really? And then what is
mm.
light really? And what is shadow?
Yeah,
And you're taught a
damn.
little bit about perspective, but why? Why does it work that way? And then you might know there are rods and cones in your eye that can detect, shades of the amount of light, and so some cells detect more darkness and brightness, and other ones detect color. How? Why? How does that work? And then how do you send that signal into your brain? And then how does the brain understand what you're seeing?
Mm,
And we know that film video is a collection of very rapidly changing images that we kind of glue together in our head and makes it look continuous. How? Why? At what speed? Where does it become continuous? And
mm.
so there are lots of interesting questions to ask about
So many.
that are very basic. And much like in music, Music schools do not teach the stuff, and you don't need it. You can be a very successful musician without knowing the basis of, there's a musical scale. If you go to school, you learn that. You learn about chords, but you don't know why there's that scale. And you don't know about the other kinds of scales, so they don't teach you.
Mm,
And you learn about harmonies, but you learn rules of how the harmonies are used. You don't understand why they're there and how you might be
mm,
able to use it differently. So, and if you're
yeah,
curious, you want to know this stuff. So that's the basis of that music book. And I'd
cool.
like to do something analogous for the art book. And, it
Amazing. Yeah.
might change nothing about what you do, or it might change it a lot. There are people that get these ideas and they'll say, well, everybody does it this way, but it's possible to do it that way. And those, it gives you a means to do that if you like. And then,
Yeah.
um,
I mean, if I could interject real quick,
hmm?
I would say that I feel like one of the biggest things that it does, it actually changes the way somebody thinks about education. I mean, even if you took sports where people are like, ah, don't focus too much on athletics, that takes you away from the amount of science, the amount of math, the amount of philosophy that exists within the world of sports itself is insane. And that's the same thing with music, chess. I mean, I recently I've been playing a little bit more chess. And I've just been thinking, I mean, it's such a profound game. I mean, there are so many things to be talked about, from human behavior to the way you think about things, the way you struggle, the way you handle, obstacles. And it's just, I mean, I think what you're saying is so true. And I've had a few teachers in my life. I used to sing a little bit of classical Indian music, and I often bring that teacher up. But I feel like
Mhm.
the reason I really value that teacher is because far more than learning how to sing, which I never did too well, I learned like a million other things that I think I carry with me to this day. And that basically makes you think that any medium can be used as like the center of a phenomenal education. It just whatever draws you. And then if you have someone who can connect that to all these different spaces, then there's no reason music can't be the entry point towards chemistry or biology or mathematics. And
Oh yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
has a lot of implications for education.
Yep, I agree. Um, I think given what you just said, one thing that you might want to consider, if you were my student, I might assign it to you. Maybe write a chapter or a short book on for athletes about Newton's force of laws in motion. So you can go into law, acceleration, force, and say how it applies to ball games, how it applies to wrestling, weightlifting, running. There's a lot of there's there's a lot in there, and it would help them understand what they're doing, appreciate what they're doing, you know, and also
Yeah.
learn about engineering and physics.
And then your brain just becomes like it makes these interconnections and that's what I was really excited to get into you with today, because your work intersects music and neuroscience, which I think is like the music world, and then the science world, which I think is like a oftentimes I feel like people end up getting siloed in one particular world. And so this type of intersection very rarely happens, I have found in my experiences in academia and just speaking with a lot of academics. But I think one thing I'm really curious to understand is, how do you feel like your upbringing with music influenced your life as a scientist, and vice versa?
Uh, well, probably by the things that we're talking about. I think if you have if you have a interest in nature, uh, you start to just try to understand things, right? And in music, that helps me. I'm not sure it helps me, but it changes me and says, okay, why not try it this way? This is the way that it's done. It doesn't have to be done that way. You and Indian classical music obviously has been going through a lot of that because people are using harmonies, for instance, in Indian classical music, and that was never done before. Um, where's that going to lead? Hell, I don't know. Um, but people change and their tastes change. Um, Things will change, that we can't stop it. So, one thing is using the classical instruments. You have one saw, so you're going saw. So then you have pa pa,
Yeah.
and you only have those on the tambura or on the I'm sorry,
Shruti.
yeah, the
Or
Shruti box. So you can't do this Western thing of temporarily changing where the saw is, right? But now you can, right? Because now so much of the music is made in studios.
mm,
So some and I hear people doing it. The first time I heard it, I was a little shocked. It's like they just changed saw. That hasn't been done in thousands of years
mm.
in that tradition. So why am I saying all this other than to say something because it's about the Indian classical tradition? Um, I guess you start to realize, and when I say you, I mean all of us who are curious and have their ears open. So okay, so if you say, "Hey, I'm Gautam, and I've just came up with a new thing in a raga where I'm going to change sa," and a lot of people are going to say, "You just ruined it. You just ruined our tradition," and other people are going to say, "Okay, it comes from the tradition, but now it's developing a new, now it's like a new branch
Mm.
growing out of the tree." So I think people that do this kind of thing, and there are probably millions of examples that and we could come up with hundreds just sitting here. Uh, those tend to be by people who kind of say, "All right, but why not? Why not try this?" Which is not to say that there's also not great art that comes from people saying, "All right, I came up with a tradition. I'm not breaking the rules of the tradition. I'm going to stay
Hmm.
exactly with it." There's also great work coming out of both.
Yeah.
And that's very human, and we're not going to change that, right? So there's always going to be kind of the tradition people, and then there's going to be the crazy people totally try to leave tradition, and then there's going to be the other people that say, "All right, I understand the foundations, but I'm going to extend it in a
I mean,
different
that's so
direction."
cool. That's so cool that that's something that's just embedded in what humans have done for
Yeah,
thousands and
as long as
thousands
we
of
have,
years.
some form of civilization,
Mm.
we're going to be doing that. That's just, yeah, it's like as, since we are the species that can read stuff from thousands of years ago, we know very well that that was happening thousands of years ago.
Mm.
I
And
mean,
it
you can
exists
read
in
about the
politics, in arts.
Pythagoreans, or you can read, you've got that great Vedic literature. You can see, well, they thought it was this, and now I don't know, the Aryans came in and they said, no, here's a whole different story, and we can explain it that way, and it goes on. And here's a great saint who explained it yet in a different way. You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
One thing I'm curious about to ask you is because you have this kind of unique intersection. I'm curious because you also brought up the word
but I'm kind of
curiosity.
saying, Gautam, it's not really unique. It seems unique. It seems
Mm.
unique because, like you said, I kind of have more than one career, right? So it seems
Yeah.
unique, but it's not really unique. It's like, uh, I guess I'm an example, without trying to be, of one of those people who says, okay, I want to understand that history, and here's another direction. But it's not like I'm trying to say I want to do it in order to be a revolutionary. Nothing wrong with being a revolutionary or a conservative. They're both okay. But, just to me, it makes sense to do that. And it's not I'm saying that from my personal experience. I know it's like that for um, in my field, many other people in my field. Okay. I'm just the one you know about. And the
Mm,
reason I know you know about it is because both of the things I'm doing happen to be public.
mm, yeah.
So you
But
can hear,
one
I put my recordings out. So oh, this guy's writing music.
music as
You know
well.
that, right?
True.
Or I'm writing papers and giving talks. So, but I think I don't think there's anything particularly unusual about that kind of approach. The only thing that might make it seem unusual is, you know, are you a loudmouth? Are you telling people? And I guess in that case, I kind of am,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
And maybe
you asked me to come on your interview, but I didn't have to do it. So
yeah.
there's a bit of me that's a loudmouth.
I mean, the thing that I'll add is I think in my experiences of interviewing academics, I feel that sometimes I think what people can do is when they research something or learn about something very deeply, there seems to be this like splitting of their self where they're like, this is my academic self that tries to understand the world, and this is my
Mhm.
other self that's a parent or whatever it is. And
Mhm.
I always ask the question to people. I've interviewed people who research meaning. And I
Mhm.
asked them, how do you feel like your research has influenced the way you move about your life or you do other things? And they're like, it doesn't. It is something I do for work and it's something I research and I'm fascinated by, but my life is separate. But to me, but if that was just one person, that would
Yeah.
be
Okay.
different.
But
But
wait. Do you believe them?
I do believe them because the way I think they even talk about it comes off as so academic, which I think is why art and music, at least for me, and I think for most people who engage in it deeply, it's something that's so personal and vulnerable that if what you're researching in things is they're interconnected in that way, there's no way they can really be separate universes. And I think because you talk a lot about how they kind of blend into each other, that's the unique part. I think a lot of people do very different things, but I don't think the interconnections are actually so prevalent for a lot of people where they're like, this is one world and this is a different world and they don't bleed into each other.
Okay. I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that, but it's not because I don't think you're right. But how much of that is because people are afraid that they're going to be accused of not really being completely committed to their academic work? I mean,
Mm,
it actually is the reason you said I have two names, professional names, and that's because in graduate school I was getting in trouble for making music, right? And I think,
really?
yeah. And so I think that one of the reasons that people might say that is in order to not have to deal with, I mean, that's my personal experience, but I'm guessing I'm not the only one, right? That
Yeah.
where you go like, all right, I'm a philosopher and my whole thing is meaning, but it has nothing to do with real meaning in the rest of my experience. That kind of sounds to me like you're just trying to say, "Hey, go Tom, don't ask me about that. I don't want to get embarrassed. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want people accusing me of being crazy or weird or unusual." That's like from your story. That's I'm not saying that's the whole thing by any means, but I'm thinking that that might be part of it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I think that's from your side perspective that I mean I can completely understand that. And so, why do you think, for example, what is so wrong with making music when you were in grad school? What is wrong with that?
Well, I mean, one stupid problem is just jealousy. People don't, they go, gee, somebody's doing more something else, which is silly, but that's humanity too, right? We're always going to compare ourselves with others. That's just who we're always going to do that. And we're kind of a for good and bad. We're kind of a herd species, right? We're a very complicated herd species. Um, you know, uh, we're very similar to bonobos and chimpanzees, but their groups will never be in a, our groups are, we have small family groups, but we also have social groups, which are kind of can be thousands or millions or something, right? And we still have all these things like hierarchy and stuff like that, right? We just do. And that's another thing I think I don't see how that's ever going to change unless humanity changes, it evolves in an unusual way. So uh, I think I lost the thread of where we were going with this. What?
I was just asking you what, because you brought up jealousy as one of the reasons for why
Oh
the
yeah,
world. Yeah.
another reason is they're afraid that you're not going to put all your time and concentration and effort into your career.
Yeah. And so but have you found that to be the reason? Because I was giving that earlier example of athletics or people often use this idea that if you do multiple things at once, they think there's no interplay between them, that one can't actually influence and improve the other one because it gives you a different perspective, which I think can
Yeah,
actually help you do it.
they may say that. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's silly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just silly. I mean, we also talk about sorry, it's if it's a sexist term, they always talk about the Renaissance man, right? Okay, well, if you really think that, you really think that, I don't know, you really think, to take the ultimate extreme, you really think that Leonardo couldn't draw and do sculpture and study
Mm,
the human body and design armaments,
mm,
and do engineering? You really think that he couldn't do all those things? So, I mean, he's the
yeah.
extreme example, obviously. Um, but it's of course. I mean, it's just silly. And now
I've been reading some of the
we
things
have these
Einstein.
very public figures like that moron Elon Musk. But yeah, okay, he's a jerk, but he has, a company that does uh that works in neuroscience. He has another one that
Builds
bores
rockets.
tunnels on the ground, and another one that puts you know that puts satellites up. So um another one that designs electric cars. I mean, uh so we have contemporary examples of people that obviously are doing more than one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, very public, very, very, Musk is one of the most famous and celebrated people in the world, even though he lately has been acting like a real jackass.
I think one part of this that might play a big role is if, let's say I'm teaching you chemistry.
Mhm.
I have a certain amount of control if all you're learning is chemistry and in my classroom all you're doing is chemistry. But if you start combining chemistry with, you know, rhythmic dance, I no longer have expertise in that particular intersection. So I kind of now am out of, so the mentors that you need sometimes also have to be people who are well versed in that intersection, which becomes significantly harder to find.
I don't know, Gotham. I think you just follow what you're interested in.
Mm,
And my advice is to do that. You're interested in something, work on it, study on it, you know,
yeah.
and those connections, looking for others to have previously made those connections, not fair to yourself even, much less to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, just do it, And if those connections come up, maybe it will take years before they come up.
Mm. So you feel like you were kind of fascinated from this from a very
Okay, let
young
me tell you.
age?
So you are interested in chemistry, right?
No, I am.
Oh,
I'm
you're not.
interested in
You were
everything.
using that as
I'm
a
absolutely,
hypothetical example of somebody else that might be interested in chemistry.
yes, but I am
But
fascinated by
a lot of
chemistry
the
as well.
chemistry stuff came out of essentially art. What's a
Mm,
shape? How are these molecules? What are the shapes of these molecules? Um, so uh, and then how do you study form? Well, sometimes you study it with with waves or even sound waves. Okay. So to say that that doesn't have anything to do with, in your example, rhythmic dance, it kind of, yeah, okay, we're not making a rhythmic dance with you know diamonds and uh, oxides. We're not doing that, but we are using some of those principles.
Hmm.
And if you learn about how waves work in sound, you're going to understand a good deal about how waves work when you're detecting the orientation and shape of a molecule.
Hmm. Something I was really interested to ask you about is because some of
I
your
mean, you were
work is,
talking about reading, right? Reading
yeah,
is one art or skill or whatever you want to call it, and use it to
do
understand
so many things.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of your work, your research is also studying learning behaviors and how that changes neurologically when people have depression or schizophrenia. I was really curious to just learn a little bit more of like what normal learning behavior looks like in the brain.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Big topic. How about um, I can you can get some of that from that pop science book I wrote. So I'd say read that. And there aren't really great reviews for lay people on this. Probably should be. Um, but I can try to send you some, and then we can have another conversation in the future.
Yeah.
But you want something very, very short. So essentially, you have to change the connections, the quote synapses between between the different neurons, and these have to change. So how do you get them to change? And there are a bunch of many different ways to get these to change. Um, Sort of classically, you can get the input side to be stronger or weaker. You can get the output side to be stronger or weaker. And then you have this whole class of modulatory inputs that can make that can tell them either or both what to do, right? So so if it's some some muscles and nerves and neurons, you can sort of model like a light switch or a bit. It's on, it's off, and it's just how much you flicker the light switch. And you can kind of say that a muscle fiber, you know, is, it's contracting and relaxing. Here it's contracting, here it's you hear all these muscles are
Hmm.
contracting and now they're relaxing, right? And you could say, oh, that's like zeros and ones. And it kind of is. That's not so bad. But what's telling me in the brain to send a signal to the spinal cord and then that spinal cord neuron to actually say on, off, that starts to become very complicated. And um, so rather than having two states in a part of the brain that we look at, the striatum, I made a simple, very simple model, and there of just a single connection instead of a zero and one. There's in a very simplified model, there's about 4,000 states, and that's why you want like a simple, silly answer of why we can do so much with how can we do so much with our um, this tiny amount of nervous tissue that we have, and that's sort of why. It's that you can adopt so many different states. I mean, I would think for every word we're drawing on and every sentence we're putting together, it's these are different states and they had to be learned. And now they have to be recovered and used. Or they have to
Hmm.
change, continue to modulate as long as we can learn. And that's just learning. We're also running all the processes of our body while this is happening, right?
Hmm.
And then there's a lot of things that we're doing that I mean, I just, breathing and heart beating and so on, and muscle movements. we're not conscious of. So and you could go on and on from that. So there's a lot of this, it's occurring that we're completely unconscious and we're unaware of. We're totally unaware of it. We need to do it. So all that processing is happening, and almost all of that can be changed, right?
Hmm. And so when you are looking at the mind or brain of a of someone with depression or schizophrenia, how is it different?
Big questions, and you probably just chose two of the diseases where that's hardest to answer.
Oh,
Sorry. I mean, if you'd asked uh, Parkinson's, it's a little simpler because we could say
yeah.
these cells are dying. And with schizophrenia, it's not really, it probably, it's not considered to be a degenerative disorder, but it probably is in part. In part, there are other things that are going on. So, I can be very glib and say the connections are wrong, or there's too much dopamine release, or this or that. That there's an absence of a particular kind of inhibitory cell in the cortex. All those are kind of true, but that's only a little glimpse into what's really going on in schizophrenia.
Mm,
Um, and depression, given that, oh, and on top of that, there are probably lots of kinds of schizophrenia that we lump together. So people have different causes and they have different manifestations, physical manifestations, as well as psychological, behavioral. So depression, obviously, people go back and forth to and from depressed states. So, and we don't know a hell of a lot, right? We know that if you use serotonin uptake blockers and kind of artificially increase the amount of serotonin in synapses, that helps a lot of people, doesn't help everybody. And why is it helping us? And there's are theories out there, and uh, no one can at this point can really say which ones, if any, are valid, and if they are,
mm.
for what fraction of people with which people with depression. So you're looking for a simple answer, and you're not going to.
Yeah, no, this is no, this is yeah. This is
Maybe
all.
in the future we'll say, oh yeah, but it was this kind of depression. It was caused by this gene or this particular change, and it's but right, we're I can give you a bunch of active
Yeah.
theories that have most of which have non-convincing evidence.
I
And
have a
maybe
question
and
for
then
you.
maybe the phenomena happens, but it's not necessarily answering your question. Yes, but is this the cause of schizophrenia or the cause of depression?
Mm. I
And
was in
there
it.
there are genetics involved. There are rare um, ge- genetic alleles that cause some schizophrenia, for instance. People have a much higher probability of developing schizophrenia. But most people with schizophrenia are not known to have any of these.
Mm.
And
I
the immune
I
system very well could be involved. And I'll tell you one big complaint I have is it's very, very, very hard to get this kind of research funded. So a lot of the work that we want to do, say in autism and schizophrenia, there's just no, we really want to do it. There are, in both cases, about 1% of humanity has these disorders. And yet, and I'm at one of the major research universities. It doesn't mean that, that there's funding, especially these days, not government funding, very little, and not even private foundation funding. So some of these things that are just, it's not that it's that expensive. It's not, but you still have to, if a graduate student or postdoc is going to work on it, still have to pay their salaries, which are tiny compared to business salaries, right? And now, many of the people we get the most talented people from around the world. But at the time of this interview, they're shutting down a lot of the visas and they're discouraging people from coming to this country to do research. So this is pathetic. It's a pathetic situation. I hope it's temporary.
mm. Yeah, I mean the whole world of funding. I was going to ask you one. I mean, I do really want to get to funding. I just have one personal question I wanted to ask you, just because it came up in a conversation yesterday. It was
Yeah,
about Alzheimer's
right.
and Alzheimer's impact on creativity.
Hmm.
Does a person with Alzheimer's, does that impact their ability to create?
Uh, there's some famous drawings of an artist who proceeded to do portraits, and I think even self-portraits, as dementia was continuing over the course of years. And it's very striking. The art really changes quite a bit.
Hmm. Okay, I'll have to check that out. Do you know the artist name by any
Oh,
chance?
I don't remember. Easy to find.
Okay, I'll check that out.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I touching back on what you were saying with funding, I mean, I think that's a one thing a lot of people have been sharing about in this in the on the show, especially people who are scientists and
Oh, by the way, so I mean, it's sad, but I guess people think that one example would be Willem de Kooning, who continued to, I mean, it's also inspiring. He continued to paint throughout his life, but apparently he had severe dementia in the last few years. So how did his
hmm,
artwork change? Apparently it changed, but
I'll have to look at both of these.
that's somebody you might want to check out.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the last question I'll ask you is, in terms of funding, what do you feel like is the ultimate purpose, I guess, of science in some essence? Because I think maybe that messaging is getting missed out on, which is why there's like a why do we need to fund this? What's the point of even knowing more about this? Because I think the ethos that scientific exploration runs on is very different than maybe what the world
Yeah,
of politics or
possibly.
funding runs
I,
on.
I have trouble. That's that's a that's a that's a big obstacle for me because I kind of don't understand it. So 2 days ago, there was a big article, editorial in the New York Times by a guy saying, "Oh, NIH and biomedical research has been a failure. We have to redesign it. We have to destroy it, build it from the ground up, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. might be the person to do that." And I'm going like, why does he say it's a failure? And they're saying like, well, there's still no cure for cancer and for Alzheimer's. And I'm going like, no cure for cancer. What is this guy talking about? People used to die of multiple myeloma in 3 years. People live for 20 years now. There are people would, you know, leukemia was a death sentence. People are essentially cured of it's very cured. It's very rare to say any disease is actually cured, but there's some leukemias that are actually cured. They're gone. They're removed. And then you look at HIV. You're old enough to remember when you were a little kid, I think, that HIV, AIDS was a death sentence. It no longer is. I mean, it's not cured, and people still have terrible, outcomes sometimes. But people are living for decades and decades. Multiple sclerosis. And then just, I figure all these senators, I mean, they're all taking Viagra, or they're taking what I obviously don't take, stuff to make their hair grow or, whatever. There's so many. And so if you're just only focused on biomedical research, I'm going like, no, there's a report coming out that people with Huntington's now might live, that the rate of decline might go down by 75%. This is a deadly disease. I mean, it's not a cure, but it's an incredibly good treatment. And this all comes from basic research. So if people just want to look at, oh, and then, so many of these people are tech people. Well, where the hell do you think transistors came from? Where do you think that the idea for software came from? You know, I can't fathom it. And so that's just looking, and so we're not even addressing this thing about what about humans and, what about Kepler wanting to understand God by understand the creator or whatever, or creation in order to, and just to be part of nature by being these unusual, this unusual species where knowledge can accrue and culture can accrue from one generation to another.
Mm,
Octopus might be very similar to us in intelligence, for all I know, but they can't, transfer the knowledge onto the next generation, right? Everybody
mm,
has to learn it all over again. We're different in that way, obviously. So, I mean, uh, so I'm not even touching that, which is perhaps the higher calling in some ways, but on the other end, if you or your family are sick, you want to, it might be that, right?
yeah.
Or if you're a Musk and the most important thing is to become the richest person ever, then it's built on engineering and computation and things that also came from scientific investigation. So it's very,
Yeah.
very hard for me to empathize.
Yeah.
Even not, I
And
mean, not just people say why do it at all, but like apparently educated people can make such silly, ignorant comments like, "Oh, this has been a failure." All right,
mm,
go back to pre-Pythagorean times. I mean, in some ways, life was better. In other ways, it wasn't.
how do you feel like a world where only private interests are pushing research forward would look like? Where if all of these things are only funded forward if their private interest or, philanthropic efforts to
You
move it
mean if the
forward.
if the government, like the government just, Trump just stepped out and said no more money for NPR, National Public Radio, and no more money
Yeah.
for PBS, the public broadcasting system. They say no more public money for health specifically is what you're saying, for
Yeah.
health
Or just
research.
science research in general. Yeah.
Okay, it also could be National Science Foundation. Uh, there's so many ways that that's just idiotic,
Mm,
but especially for power hungry people like Trump, Musk, Vance. I mean, these people presumably, want like this country to be powerful. Well, why do you think that's happened? Right? It's not only because of unfettered capitalism. It's not only because people want to be rich. It's also because people have been conducting the kinds of things that allow
yeah.
them to build electric cars and MRI machines and cancer treatments and new drugs and so on, right? And so if we get rid of this, yeah, it's humanity will continue to exist, but the kinds of things that they say they're looking for, you know, uh, that's going to be wiped out.
Mhm.
And on that
Yeah.
happy note, maybe we can pick this up again. You've got some reading
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
You're
Would
assigned
love
to
that. I
write
mean,
a
this
book for athletes on Newtonian physics.
this is a great conversation. I really appreciate you for your time.
You betcha. It's nice to meet you, Gotam. Good luck with
Yeah.
everything. Okay,
Thanks.
bye now.